Biblical slavery is one of those topics where apologists twist themselves into pretzels, trying to make it seem palatable. They insist it was just indentured servitude, that it wasn't as bad as American slavery, or that God was just working within the culture. Let's take apart these claims one by one and expose the reality of what the Bible actually says about slavery, and how Christianity took it to the next level by inventing race to justify it. Stick around, because by the end, we'll show how Christianity didn't just fail to oppose slavery, actually made it worse, creating the racial system that locked people into generational bondage. 1. The Old Testament, God, the supreme slave guild leader. The Old Testament doesn't just allow slavery, it formalizes it into law. God himself provides the Israelites with a detailed instruction manual for the ownership and treatment of human beings. Explicit endorsements of slavery in the Old Testament. Buying and selling people as property. Leviticus 25-44, 46. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property, and can make them slaves for life. This isn't indentured servitude. This is permanent, generational chattel slavery. Rules for beating slaves. Exodus 21:20, 21. Anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished, if the slave dies as a direct result, but they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. God directly allows slave owners to beat their slaves, just as long as they don't die immediately. Selling daughters into servitude. Exodus 21:7, 11. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do. Women were specifically excluded from the limited protections male Hebrew slaves had, forcing war captives into slavery and sexual slavery. Numbers 31-17, 18, Deuteronomy 22:10, 14. Now kill all the boys, and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has never slept with a man. After massacring entire populations, Israelite soldiers were given permission to take virgin girls as slaves. This is not a case of God merely regulating an existing practice. This is God actively setting up the rules of slavery. If God is morally perfect, then why did he codify human ownership into law? At this point, he's not just tolerating slavery. He's the head of the Slave Owners Guild. 2. The New Testament. Christianity fails to condemn slavery. If the Old Testament lays out the rule book for slavery, then surely the New Testament, with its supposed message of love and compassion, corrects this. Right? No. Instead, the New Testament doubles down on submission and obedience. Slaves, obey your masters. Ephesians 6:2-5. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Rather than condemning slavery, Paul tells slaves to obey like good Christians. No abolition in sight. 1 Timothy 6:2-1. All who are under the yoke of slavery should consider their masters worthy of full respect, so that God's name and our teaching may not be slandered. The concern isn't about ending slavery, just about keeping it orderly and uncontroversial. Return to your master, even if he's abusive. 1 Peter 2:18. Slaves, submit yourselves to your masters with all respect, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. So even if your master treats you cruelly, you're supposed to accept it as part of God's plan. At no point does Jesus, Paul, or any other biblical figure call for the abolition of slavery. Instead, the message is clear. Slavery is fine. Don't fight it. Serve your master like you serve God. 3. Christianity doesn't just endorse slavery, it makes it worse by inventing race. If the Bible had simply endorsed slavery, that would be bad enough. But Christianity went even further. It created the racial framework that turned slavery into an inescapable, generational system. How Christianity invented race to justify slavery. In the ancient world, slavery was based on war, debt, or conquest, not skin color. Medieval Christianity forbade enslaving fellow Christians, but needed a loophole when European nations wanted to enslave Africans. Solution? Invent race-based slavery. The curse of Ham, Genesis 9:25-27, was twisted to claim that black people were destined for servitude. Papal bulls, 15th century, authorized Christian nations to conquer and enslave non-Christians. The Great Chain of Being, a medieval doctrine, ranked white Europeans closer to God, with darker-skinned people lower on the hierarchy. By the time the transatlantic slave trade took off, Christianity had fully developed race as a divine justification for slavery. This is why the argument that biblical slavery wasn't race-based misses the point. Christianity invented racial slavery and made it worse than anything in the ancient world. 4. Final verdict. Christianity is not just complicit, it's a driving force. The Old Testament doesn't just allow slavery, it provides the laws and divine approval. God isn't a passive observer, he's actively setting up the system. The New Testament fails to correct this and instead reinforces obedience to slavery. Christianity then goes a step further and invents race to justify mass generational slavery. So not only does Christianity fail to oppose slavery, it actually escalates it to its most brutal and dehumanizing form. The idea that the Bible is a moral guide falls apart the moment you realize that its God is the architect of the worst slavery system in history. So, let's recap. The Old Testament doesn't just tolerate slavery, it institutionalizes it. God himself hands out the rulebook for buying, selling, and beating human beings. Then, the New Testament rolls in, and instead of correcting this barbarity, it just tells slaves to stay in line and obey their masters. And just when you think it can't get any worse, Christianity goes above and beyond by inventing the concept of race to justify mass generational slavery. Bravo. Truly a moral masterpiece. Now, at this point, I can already hear the apologists typing away. But slavery back then wasn't the same as American slavery. But God was just working within the culture. But Jesus came to set us free spiritually, right? Sure, keep telling yourself that. Meanwhile, history tells a different story. One where Christianity didn't just fail to oppose slavery, it actively made it worse. So, if this is the best a divine, all-knowing God can come up with, maybe it's time to start questioning the source material. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. And if you're feeling extra spicy, share this video with a Christian who still thinks the Bible is the ultimate moral guide. See you in the next one.